Derek West Harris went into one of these halfway houses because he had unpaid traffic tickets, and he was killed 2 days later.
We believe the person poses a threat to us, or we're stopping them from a violent crime. The law allows us to frisk somebody.
We're being forced to arrest innocent people. We're being forced, everything was about numbers.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Thursday evening, June 21st. A lot to cover tonight here, but first, halfway to hell. New York Times' series called Unlocked Inside New Jersey's Halfway Houses. It is causing quite a stir in the Garden State. The series profiles a pattern of drug use, gang activity, sexual abuse, all behind the walls of halfway houses in the Garden State. Now, some inmates say it is so bad they'd rather go to prison instead. Well, tonight we're going to hear from both the reporter behind the series and the senior vice president of the company that runs many of the halfway houses profiled. And we will also get into this evening another issue we spent a lot of time on, that's stop and frisk. Yesterday, the NYPD, in response to growing criticism of the controversial practice, offered reporters a demonstration of how a proper stop and frisk should be undertaken. Well, we're going to hear from a suspended NYPD officer who's going to tell us how close or far the demonstration was from reality. And that officer, currently suspended for what he believes retaliation for going public with his complaints about the practice within the NYPD. Now, all that is coming up on this edition of RFL, but let's begin with a look inside New Jersey's halfway houses. As I mentioned, New York Times just released a series called Unlocked Inside New Jersey's Halfway Houses. It documents criminal acts ranging from murder to rape to drug use in the facilities, aided in part, they allege, by a lack of supervision. Places so bad, they say bedlam reigns. Now, in some cases, inmates escaped, even went on to kill and commit other heinous crimes. And in the meantime, the company that runs many of the facilities profiled prospered and remains, without any debate, very politically connected. Well, Sam Dolnick of the New York Times, he was the reporter on the series, and he filed this report.
It's chaotic, it's crazy, everybody goes anywhere they want.
Beat up, stabbed, people making shanks.
In no way, shape, or form was I ever rehabilitating myself.
Every year, New Jersey sends thousands of inmates to halfway houses run by private operators. One company dominates halfway houses in New Jersey and across the country: Community Education Centers. It has close ties to many politicians of both parties, most notably New Jersey's governor, Chris Christie.
Places like this are to be celebrated.
This is Sam Dolnick for the New York Times. Community Education says its innovative programs, which include counseling and job training, have helped to lower New Jersey's incarceration rate. The company says it has changed lives.
I think Childhood Hall spearheaded the process of change for me.
I interviewed a company executive off camera.
I don't think you can find a better re-entry model anywhere possibly in the world. I think we do a damn good job, and I'm personally very proud of the work that we do.
But interviews with former officials, workers, and inmates raise questions about how halfway houses in New Jersey are being run by Community Education and other operators.
CC is more built on making money than helping people.
Our 10-month investigation found that the halfway houses have become a shadow correction system with lax oversight.
So not only did they not give me any help at all, they made my problems worse.
Statewide.
Interviews, as well as stacks of official documents, reveal many problems. Inmates and former workers say drugs are easy to find. Are drugs for sale in there?
Yeah, drugs are for sale in there.
And they hand off the bundle of dope, they handle off the cash, they handle off the cocaine, they handle the crack off.
And there are some staff who are security officers who insist in bringing drugs in.
Investigators say gangs dominate.
So an older resident comes in my office, he wants to see me, he sits down, he says, Mr. Watkins, I got to tell you something, but it got to stay between me and you. No problem. He said, the Bloods are running the NA meetings. I said, excuse me?
The facilities are far less restrictive than prisons. Inmates sleep in open rooms with bunk beds.
No guards watching you, no real true security. It's a supposed security.
What's important is for the resident to get involved in structure, because that's what treatment is about.
In promotional videos, community education says its services discourage inmates from returning to crime. But many facilities are staffed by low-paid workers, some of whom are former inmates themselves. I spoke with Derek Watkins, a senior director fired amid turmoil at one community education facility.
Because you're providing drug treatment. That's what you're providing. That's supposed to be the goal. It doesn't end up being that, because if you don't have the skills to talk about drug treatment, you're just, for lack of a better word, babysitting.
Vanessa Falcone, a recovering prescription drug addict, says she was sexually assaulted for weeks by a janitor in her halfway house.
He basically tricked everybody into getting me into a conference room by myself. And that's when the worst attack happened, where he tried to rape me.
Community Education Centers says the criticism is unfair. It says drugs and gangs are rarely, if ever, present in its facilities. And it says the company's success stories far outweigh the problems.
So I think that there are things that have gone wrong here. There are events that have occurred, but to focus on a number of events or the report of some employees that are, in my opinion, are not representative of the overall of the hundreds of people that are working in this state, I think is a miscue.
Mr. Christie's corrections commissioner told me the halfway houses do an excellent job of helping inmates make the transition to society. But interviews and documents show that in addition to problems inside, over 5,000 inmates have escaped in the last 7 years from facilities run by community education and other operators.
It was like an endless, redundant thing. If we apprehended 10 more escaped, maybe 20 more escaped.
Yes. In 2010, Viviana Tully was murdered by a former boyfriend who had just escaped from a halfway house.
The fact that my baby sister is no longer here. And he should have been behind bars for a much longer time, and he wasn't.
That I know of, there was nothing done about any particular halfway house that had an inordinate amount of escapes as opposed to any other. It's just, to me, it just appeared to be that's the way business was done.
And thanks again to the Times for use of that video. Now, our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, who joins us now, he spoke with Sam Dolnick, the reporter on that story yesterday. Andrew, fill us in on your conversation.
Well, Rich, Sam and I had a wide-ranging conversation. We talked a lot about the details and the points that he was making in the piece and in the articles in the Times. He also told me how he was deeply moved and disturbed about what he found during the course of his 10-month investigation. Conditions behind those facility walls that some say were actually worse than they were in prison. Here now some excerpts of my interview yesterday with Sam. Sam Dolnick with the New York Times joins us now. Sam, thanks for a little bit of your time and for your reporting on this story.
Hi, happy to be here.
Want to start with some of what you've reported going on inside these halfway houses. You've got stories of murders, robberies, drugs, gang violence, sexual assaults, escapees then committing other violent crimes. I'm just wondering, what individual stories stuck with you through your 10-month investigation, either for the nature of what happened or just the surprise that it was happening inside state-sanctioned halfway houses?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in this world, and it's a grim one. Talking to people who have been traumatized and attacked, and it's been difficult. The story that sticks with me the most, I think, is the story of Derek West Harris, who went into one of these halfway houses because he had unpaid traffic tickets, and he was killed 2 days later in a robbery inside his room.
You know, one of the items from your reports that struck with me and really struck to the heart of the conditions inside these halfway houses, you have prisoners who you said would tell people they'd rather be back in prison than be in the halfway house. You also have employees or former employees of these halfway houses who used to be corrections officers who have quit because they were appalled by the conditions inside.
Yeah, these places are as large as prisons often, but they have very little of the security. So you've got one, maybe two guards on duty at a time. They're paid $11 an hour. They've received very little training, and they're responsible for 150, 170 inmates. And remember, these inmates are not in cells, there's not locks, there's not bars. They're free to roam if they like. And it's a scary situation, both for the inmates and for the guards.
What was your reaction when you realized both the people who were being held at these halfway houses and the people who were supposed to be watching them are all scared to be where they are?
I mean, I think it's an example of how troubled this system has become. It's started, about 2 decades ago with the best of intentions to help prisoners re-enter society. This is a population that gets very little help. But over the past 20 years, 10, 15 years, it's changed into something much larger. We called it in the paper a shadow correction system, and I think that holds up.
It kind of blew me away because the significance of the problems inside these facilities and the fact that it seemed like nobody either knew about it or had an incentive to fix it, to me it was pretty surprising. It sounds like it surprised you a great deal as well.
Yeah, constantly reporting, we would just be shocked to learn of, I'd be speaking with someone and they'd tell me a story about how drugs enter the facility. One of their big facilities is right next to a highway, and people would stand on the shoulder of the road and they'd cut open tennis balls and fill them with drugs and then throw them over the fence because the fence is that close to the highway. So those kinds of details about how the dysfunction actually happens day to day were continuously shocking to me.
And yet everybody in a position of responsibility or authority seems to say, hey, there's nothing wrong here, everything's working the way it's supposed to.
Well, they've said that so far, but it's early days. Our story just published yesterday, and we've gotten a flood of information in the days since. So I expect that there will be more to come.
But some terrific reporting on this series, and I would advise everybody watching us tonight to read the 3 parts. Sam Dolnick, reporter from the New York Times, and his 10-month investigation into these halfway houses. Sam, thanks very much for the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
As I mentioned before, my conversation with Sam hit a number of different areas, and Rich, included in that was the money that's going to these corporations who run these halfway houses, and the money angle for the politicians who make sure to keep them in business. It turns out both halves are prospering pretty well from all this arrangement. That's an element of this we're going to get to in a few minutes.
That's right. Taxpayer dollars, what is actually buying the general public, we'll get into.